I'd like to turn this event over to Andy Shalal, who is the founder and CEO of Busboys and Poets. He will introduce our speakers for tonight and give us a little bit of insight on what is happening tonight. Just a few ground rules. We are in a webinar style discussion, so please make sure that your audio and video are turned off, and please put any questions that you might have for the panelists into the chat, and our team will get to those questions as we can. This event is being recorded, and it will be available via link later this week, and it is also available right now on the Busboys and Poets Facebook page. And now, Andy Shalal.
Thank you so much, Ajane. Thank you so much for joining us, all the attendees that are coming. We expect more people, and please share it with others as well. Let them know this is happening. These are really important conversations we've been having. So I'd like to welcome you to this series on race dialogues. This is a joint effort with the George Mason University, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution, soon to be named that on July 1st. The John Mitchell Jr. Program for History, Justice, and Race, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, led by Will Schwartz. I want to say a very special thank you to my partner, Dr. Charles Chavis, my partner in this series, who will be co-hosting this event with us here at Busboys and Poets along with us. The series takes off where our own in-house series at Busboys and Poets left off right before the coronavirus pandemic. The series was called A.C.T.O.R, a continuing talk on race, which provides a venue for intimate, oftentimes difficult conversations around race. And of course, this conversation has always been timely in America, and people are starting to discover it these days a little bit more. We are proud to be part of this. Tonight we have two very special people. Thank you for arranging this, Charles. We have the Reverend Naomi Tutu. She is born in South Africa. She is the daughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Her professional experience ranges from being a development consultant in West Africa to being a coordinator for programs on race and gender-based violence in education at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. In addition, Reverend Tutu has taught at the University of Hartford, University of Connecticut, and Brevard College in North Carolina. She serves as program coordinator for the Historic Race Relations Institute at Fisk University. She is also a missioner for racial and economic equity at the Cathedral of All Souls in Asheville, North Carolina, a beautiful city. And with us is her daughter. We are really blessed to have both generations here. Mungi Ngomane, she is a business operations manager for Outvote, a platform that amplifies the voices of grassroots campaigners and organizers, a much needed service these days because this is all about getting out the vote and getting people out there. She is the granddaughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu and patron of the Tutu Foundation UK. She has worked in Middle East conflict resolution and for the advancement of women and girls. She has a master's in international studies and diplomacy from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. We're proud to have both of them here. I want to turn it over now to Dr. Chavis to give us a little more introduction.
Yes, thank you so much, Andy. And I want to say thank you, Reverend Tutu or Naomi, for just taking the time out. It's definitely a tremendous honor. You know how much you mean to me and as a mentor, and I'm so thankful for your daughter Mungi as well, for being able to join us. I know I seek your advice often, and I really want to be able to share some of that wisdom that you share with me to this larger community, as I believe that you have a word for this moment. And so we're just thankful at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Conflict and Peace to have to be able to establish a John Mitchell Jr. program. We established the Mitchell program in 2019, and Reverend Tutu served as one of our founding advisors. And we're thankful for that service. And I'm not going to take up too much more time, but I just want to say thank you again, and we're looking forward to the discussion tonight. Andy?
Yeah. Well, we are honored to have you obviously here, and we wanted to sort of get in the moment. We are now witnessing one of the largest protests that we've ever seen in this country. Certainly I've been in this country for 50 years, haven't seen anything like this. And it feels like there's a moment, there's this paradigm shift that's taking shape. You come from a country that had to, had to struggle with apartheid for many, many years, and you went through it. Are you seeing parallels about what's going on? Where is this movement, in your opinion, going? Is it something that's going to last, or is it something that's just another fleeting moment?
I really do think that this is something that is going to last, and it might not last in the way that we're seeing it right now. I think it is interesting that last week South Africa celebrated Youth Day on June 16th, which was the day of the uprising of youth starting in Soweto, which led to our free election. And if you had looked in South Africa at different times between 76 and 94, there were times when you would say, oh, maybe the struggle is not going on. But what I see a parallel here to what happened in South Africa from 76 to 94 is the fact that this movement is truly a grassroots movement, that we are seeing leadership coming up from young people across the country, in big cities, in small towns, in rural America. We are seeing young people, Black young people, white young people, other people of color who are taking the lead in this movement. And the reason that I say that to me looks very much like South Africa is that if you look back in South Africa, like in 1960, so when in the 60s, when the ANC and the PAC were banned and that leadership was imprisoned or forced into exile, there was really almost a dormancy in the struggle, because that our struggle had been identified with identifiable leaders, that names, the Mandelas, the Sobukwes, and when those names were no longer there was a sense of people feeling the weight of apartheid, and my parents' generation, I think, to an extent, thinking there is no way we can overthrow this system. But when you look at 76 moving forward, you have leadership springing up in churches, in trade unions, in youth groups, and in all kinds of organizations. And as organizations were banned and people were arrested, new leaders sprang up from the most unlikely places. And that's what I see happening in the US right now. And so there might be, as there were times from 76 to 94, where it seemed as though the movement was not the dramatic movement that we had seen. There were not as many strikes, there were not as many protest marches, but the movement was being built at the grassroots, and people were being committed, were feeling committed to changing the country, even as their names were not known. And we saw that growth of leadership that could not be simply chop off a name and then we have no leaders, because the leaders were springing up from all kinds of organizations in all kinds of places. And I see that right now in the US.
And I think what makes it even that much more special and different is that it's beyond the US. It's a global movement. And we're seeing it in the most oddest of places. I mean, in Auckland, New Zealand, we're seeing it in Lebanon, we're seeing it in Palestine, we're seeing it in Egypt, we're seeing it everywhere, in South America, other places. Why now? What made this moment, in your opinion, so unique and so special that suddenly it tipped? I mean, so many ingredients have to come together to make that happen, right? What made this particular moment so unique as to be a tipping moment, not only for the United States, but throughout the entire globe, which was different, of course, than what happened in South Africa.
Yeah, and again, I think there is some level of similarity in that the recognition around the world that apartheid was something that impacted people around the world. And though the focus was on the liberation of South Africa, people were making the connection to what was happening in South Africa, to what was happening in Palestine, to what was happening in the US. So there was that level of similarity. And I do think that, you know, one of the things that has been very clear has been the rise in the right wing around the world, right? The rise in anti-immigrant sentiment, particularly in Europe, in the US, the rise in the okayness of vile speech and actions against people who are minorities in the United Kingdom, in the US. And at the same time, a sense from our young people that we know our history. We have now been taught our history. That looking at the US, for instance, that this attempt at hiding the history of Black people, the history of race in this country has been overturned by people in their own communities, that it is not being waiting for the educational system to teach us the realities of slavery, the realities of Jim Crow, the realities of the violence that was the experience of so many people around the world, that communities have taken the education of our young people upon our communities, letting them know the history of the contributions, now talking specifically about the US, the contributions and the suffering of Black people in this country. And our young people, you know, that are saying, we're not our parents, which is very similar to the young people in South Africa in the 70s and 80s, saying, we're not our parents. We are not afraid of you. We know that what we are fighting for is not simply our liberation, but in fact, our humanity. And to be honest, your humanity too. And so that for us, and I'm saying that young people are saying, for us, this struggle is so important. We have no fear. We have no fear. And we are determined that a change is going to come, and it might not come overnight. And this to me actually is the thing that is most inspiring that I am seeing and hearing from young people, is that they're saying, we don't want those quick things that you put up, you know, that we don't want corporations saying, oh, we're having diversity conversations. We don't want people putting up Black Lives Matter signs. We are talking about a fundamental change. And because we're talking about a fundamental change, we know it's not going to happen overnight. And we are invested in this for the long haul. And it's kind of weird that I'm talking as the old person here, but this is what I am hearing, and this is what to me is inspiring, and has me taking off my hat to our young people across the world.
And Charles, I wanted to turn it over to you, but the Reverend mentioned something I think that very unique and very special. She mentioned that that my humanity is connected to your humanity. There's a word for that in South Africa. Can you speak to that a little bit, and then I want to turn it over to Charles.
Would you like me?
Yes,
Mungi,
I'd like you to go ahead and speak to that young woman.
I mean, the word for that is Ubuntu, and we could have my mom speak about it, because that's really where I learned it from, is from her and my grandfather and from the South African people. But, you know, Ubuntu is about our humanity and how we're all interconnected, and I am only because you are. And I think that COVID has been a time where people have finally maybe not accepted it. You know, we still have people trying to open up their states when there are people around them dying, but have at least acknowledged how interconnected we are, and that what I do affects you, and what you do, whether or not you're thinking of it, affects me as well. And I think that's very important, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. I do want to return to one note about the youth and highlight what happened on Saturday at Trump's rally, where the youth were the ones that bought all those tickets. You know, I think that the youth gets a bad rep sometimes, and I like to think of myself as part of the youth. I'm only 27, but I had no idea that we were all buying tickets to this rally and not showing up. So, you know, kudos to them, and I think we need to acknowledge them in these moments. You know, people on the right will say it was a petty thing to do and make false equivalencies to, well, this is what will happen with mail-in ballots. But no, I think this is also keeping people safe. There's no need for you to be in an enclosed space like that during COVID. And so I think a lot of those youth probably had, you know, Ubuntu at mind, even if they didn't know what the word was.
Thank you,
Charles, please.
Thank you, Mungi. Yeah, I wanted to just get back to the foundation of the BLM, or Black Lives Matter, specifically Reverend Tutu. When we were at Vanderbilt together, I always refer to this time as a transitional stage for me whenever everyone was processing this. And thinking about the activists who established Black Lives Matter specifically, and where, you know, how the movement is literally ballooned and exploded. Now the streets are being named after their movement, whereas in 2013 they were being demonized, you know, as terrorist organization, right? I guess in terms of the larger, when we talk about grassroots organizing and the thankless work that a lot of these activists have been doing, I think it's convenient now that we have a lot of whites who are joined in the party and, you know, saying, you know, we support this movement, you know, these things are awful. But like I always tell, I've been telling a lot of my colleagues, there's thousands of George Floyds and Breonna Taylors, right? You know, and it's really interesting. I think COVID created a situation to where more people than usual had to care about what they're witnessing, right? So I just want to get your thoughts on, you know, the evolution of the Black Lives Matter movement, specifically dealing with the struggle as an activist and the rewards that oftentimes come later rather than sooner.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, and you're referring us back to the murder of Trayvon Martin, and I think that that was a time for many of us when the fact that our children are never seen as children was really brought home to us, right? That it doesn't matter that this young man was doing what police tell young children, young people who are accosted by strangers to do, right? To scream and fight, do not give up, do not go with somebody who is strange. That this young man was doing exactly what parents tell their children to do. And yet his murder was found to be justified for no reason than the fact that our Black children are not seen as children. It doesn't matter how young they are. And subsequent to that, we have had over and over the examples of the police officer throwing down the young girl in a bathing suit at a pool party, the security officer in the school throwing a child across the desk. I mean, all of those things that you would think would make a society say something is not right. And yet, instead of having those kinds of actions say to people, that could be my child. What it did was it had people coming out of the woodwork trying to justify the violence against Black children based on all kinds of things. Or she had a cell phone out, or so all of this, and those people who stood up to say, this is why we say Black Lives Matter, being vilified and called everything but a child of God, right? And that movement being set up as some kind of attempt at separating people. Well, the truth is, what they were saying is, we are separated. And it is only when this country is willing to admit that Black Lives Matter that we will ever be able to say all lives matter. But that is the history of our struggle, right? That is the history of our struggle. That nowadays they're saying to these young people, can't you be more like Martin Luther King Jr.? Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most hated and vilified people in this country when he was alive. And now all of a sudden he has become this saintly person and being used by the very people who are trampling on the rights that he fought for, as some kind of justification for the vilification of those who are actually following in his footsteps. And so, for me, this attempt to demonize Black Lives Matter is just the way that racism does. It always attempts to demonize those who point out what racism is doing. That racism is killing our children. That racism is questioning our humanity. And that therefore racism is questioning the humanity of all people.
Thank you so much, Reverend.
Yeah.
Amy, did you
I wanted to follow up. I could listen to you, I think, all night long. Just you speak, and we can just sit there and watch and listen.
She's a priest. Be careful what you wish for.
listen?
She's her father's daughter for sure. But I wanted to ask you about the idea of intersectionality and the role of allyship in movements. I know. Can you speak to that? I know allyship has become kind of this weird thing that white people are trying to walk very, very gingerly into, and they're learning. But there's a lot of missteps and there's a lot of expectations. Can you speak about the role of others other than Black people in this movement of Black Lives Matter in this country, and how did it play out in South Africa? What was the role of white abolitionists in South Africa?
Yeah, and Mungi started laughing when you said that, because we were on a podcast not long ago, and I had said I had been listening to the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas just a few days before then, and that she had said and had made me sit up and pay attention, and that she had said, ally is not the term we need to be using. That you're not allies. You're not allies. This struggle against racism is not our struggle. So, if you're saying that you're an ally, it's like you're supporting the people who are doing the fighting, but the people whose struggle it is. That's what an ally is, right? It's somebody who comes in to offer you support as you are struggling. And she's like, no, this struggle against racism is your struggle, white people. Yeah. This is your work. This is, it's not about helping us out. It is about recognizing the ways in which structural racism dehumanizes every single person in the society. that there is, and again, you know, it is Ubuntu that the proverb, a person is a person only through other people. That there is no way that we can be in a racist society and anybody's humanity be intact. We are all in this struggle. And so, but there are different roles, right, in the struggle. And I would tell people to look at Mungi's Juneteenth article that I think that you linked up, where she gave some practical things for white people in the struggle to be doing. But I do think that part of the work of white people who recognize the damage of racism is to be educators in the white community, is to be the people who challenge their friends and relatives, to be the ones who challenge the corporate structures where they continue to be the majority, they challenge the governmental structures where they continue to be the majority. That there are places that if I walk in, the conversation becomes completely different, right? And whereas when a white person walks in, people will continue their conversation, which gives them an opening to challenge that conversation that I would never have as a Black woman. And so it is, I think Kelly is right. It is not allies that we are looking for. It is people who recognize that this struggle is about their liberation as well. And I do think that that is the connection in South Africa, that when you look at the 80s, the 70s and 80s, that the realization, particularly in the white community, that this is about our liberation too. That, you know, when you had young white men leading the End Conscription campaign, talking about when we are called into the military, we're not being called to defend our country, we are called to kill our countrymen and women. And so, no, we are not going to do that. This is our liberation as well. And I think that realization amongst, again, particularly young white people, but a number of white leaders like Bears Nordia in the church, of trade union leaders, that this struggle against apartheid is the struggle for the liberation of South Africa. And in the same way, this struggle in the United States is the struggle for the liberation of this whole nation and the humanity of all of Americans. Don't get me. Y'all got me preaching here.
No. You moved me so much. I have to tell you. But Mungi, I want to turn to you about your article, the Juneteenth article that you wrote. And I know we put the link up here, but can you talk a little bit about some of those ideas that you put out that can help people to be more effective and more in tune to what they have to do to end this apartheid in this country and throughout the globe?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about starting with one question, and it's who am I centering in this attempt that I'm making? Am I centering myself, or am I centering Black people because this is what I've listened to them and I've heard what they've said and this is what they need? Not, deciding what they need. I think a lot of companies and organizations right now are trying to figure out where they add to the struggle. And the problem with that is the conversations are, as my mother said, having these like diversity trainings that they're nice on its head, but you're not really doing much work. You're attending and you're sitting and you're listening to someone come and do a diversity training. And then what's the follow-up from that? A lot of these things, there's no follow-up. We do one thing like the black square, and then we virtue signal to someone that we are with you. But after that, I'm returning to my normal scheduled content and I don't have to do much else because I've kept my followers, I've kept my friends, They think I'm here for them, but I haven't put myself outside of my comfort zone. I haven't spoken to my family members and cousins who say racist things or don't see color. And I think it's about making sure that you're not being centered, but you're also listening to what Black people need. And Black people don't need a black square. They need you to donate to organizations, and not just once. If you have the money, keep donating, keep it up. Read books. I've had people who said, oh, I read this after the first weekend when Ryan started, and then said, but what else can I do? Did you read everything this weekend? I can't read that quickly, so that's amazing that you read all of that in one weekend and now you're done. I'm still reading and I'm Black, so read, keep reading, and don't only read books that are about the history, read novels and fiction from Black writers as well, so you can also see our experience in happy times, not just about our struggle. And then also, protest. I have not for the last month gone to protest. I protested for the first time this year on Friday because I just didn't feel like that was the way that I was helping my people. I was spending time at home, checking in on friends, maybe drinking a bit too much wine, and writing. And writing is what I thought was my way of helping. We all have different, ways that we help the struggle and the movement. And that was my way. So go protest. And if you are a person of white skin, please put your body in between the police and Black people because they don't see you the same way. We've seen that so many times when there were shootings in the US, and I'm sure there are white communities that say the same thing as Black communities, but often when there's a shooting, I'm in different text threads where if they say that the man is in custody, we're all like, oh, must have been white, because Black men or Black women are never taken into custody alive, even if they didn't have a weapon or they, didn't take the lives of other people. So it's putting your money where your mouth is, but also I think putting your body where your mouth is. And then doing the research on your own to figure out what else you can do. I think that was maybe the first thing I said was Google what you can do to help before you ask a Black friend. And if you don't think this is on Google, just try it first and see, just so you're not adding extra work for Black people. And so I think there are so many ways, but it's about figuring out, are these things that you're doing that still make you feel comfortable, or are you a bit uncomfortable because it's something new and it's something that will actually make a difference in the lives of the Black people around you?
Thank you so much, Mungi. I wanted to just piggyback off of that, specifically as it relates to how, in this moment, I know a lot of Black people are getting berated by some of their white friends, right? What can I do? What can I do? And this is something that, I've been hearing. But what's really, after talking to one of my colleagues, Dr. Corey Henderson, who's a historical trauma expert, he was telling us about how it's important to understand, for whites to understand that oftentimes African Americans are re-traumatized, right? When we constantly have to provide you with readings and making sure you have everything you need, when we're constantly living through, what they're just waking up to in a lot of cases, right? Because a vast majority of the larger community, larger white community, is just waking up to the realities and the trauma that African Americans have been facing, people of African descent have been facing for eons, right? And so I think that's so important to your point, like reading, I don't know who that said it, reading is fundamental, but it's just like, if I get one more question, right, from somebody asking me what can they do, so I think that's so important. But we have people in the audience who have questions. I'm gonna turn it over to Christy Jones to field some of those questions. Christy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We have a couple of questions that have come in through the chat. Our first question is coming from, and I hope you all can hear me, Joshua Levine. And his question and comment was this: there is a perception here that the South African struggle was driven in passion and sustainability by the power and courage of Nelson Mandela, who stoically survived imprisonment for so long. Does success in the United States depend on the creation or the recognition of a similar singular figure?
No, I don't think so. And I have to say that is a non-South African perspective of the South African struggle, right? And I think that it's very much a Western perspective on the South African struggle, that it was Nelson Mandela's persona that brought us to an end to apartheid. That, you know, people in South Africa are very clear that the movement, that the end to apartheid was due to grassroots activists in South Africa, the international support, the sanctions movement, trade union movement in South Africa, the churches, so that it was it was not a single person. It was the work of thousands and thousands of people, just as is happening in the U.S. and around the world right now. That Nelson Mandela was an amazing human being is not questioned. I don't think that what he experienced on Robben Island was, again, he was not the only one on Robben Island for that amount of time. And so that the recognition in South Africa is that, yes, we were fortunate to have somebody like Nelson Mandela who was able to use really his sense of Ubuntu that he used while he was in jail, and the sense of Ubuntu that he carried on outside of outside of jail in his negotiations, but that even in the negotiations, he was not alone. So I think that there is an urge always to have a name, a face that we can hold up and people can identify with. But the people who were active in the struggle recognize that it was every single person who marched. It was all those young people who were arrested and tortured. It was all those people who died for us. Every single one of them was a part of our liberation. And Nelson Mandela was our first democratically elected president, and worked to reconcile South Africans, but he was not a singular figure responsible for South Africa's liberation.
I think there's an organization called Teaching for Change, which teaches about this kind of work, and they put out a book called Beyond Heroes and Holidays, and it really speaks exactly to what you're saying, Naomi, about the idea that oftentimes we try to relegate these very powerful movements to an individual, and part of it is really kind of a way for capitalist society to sort of control people, in a sense, to say this is one person out of so many. And this way it disempowers and takes away that incredible building that had to take shape in order for that person to be able to stand on top of shoulders, to be able to move forward. They may have the voice, but they definitely are not the ones that are there. And we tend to put them on pedestals. Of course, we've seen you put people on pedestals, you can tear them down very easily. And I think that's part of it. So the disempowerment that an individual can have is powerful in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think that's what the beauty is in the purposefully decentralized movement of Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely.
I can say more about that, but Ajane did want to have a question as well. I wanted to give her that opportunity. Go ahead, Ajane.
Yeah, so when we're talking about movements specifically, and the role of the church, in past movements, we've had church leaders within the fold, or movements have met in churches or rallied around church leadership, including your father and the coalition of churches, that the church pastors that he brought together to form the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as we look at history, even in Birmingham, Alabama, the civil rights movement, we have church pastors meeting and congregations meeting to have mass meetings before they go out and protest. However, recently, particularly in the past week and a half here in America, we've had two prominent white pastors who are pastors of interracial and interdenominational churches who have been, who position themselves to position themselves controversially, right? And so they've been now confronted with their retweeting or the things that they said in jest that they weren't really thinking through white blessings versus white privilege, or retweeting anti-racist retweeting racist commentary on Twitter. And so that now has come back to bite them. And so my question is, what is the role of religion right now, as you see it, for dismantling racism and white supremacy? And how can these pastors and other pastors regain or rebuild trust as they publicly apologize and seek forgiveness? And is it too early for forgiveness in the process towards reconciliation for these pastors?
Yeah. And, you know, I have to say that the truth is that the institutional church has actually been on the wrong side of almost every struggle for justice, unfortunately. So, so the institutional church is the place that I learned about liberation, was in the church. But it was also the place where I learned about the realities of apartheid. You know, the church in South Africa talks a lot about the English-speaking churches and puts up people like Trevor Huddleston as church leaders who were opposed to apartheid. But the church doesn't say that, doesn't speak very much of the fact that they, even in those English-speaking churches, that they paid Black priests less than they paid white priests, that they gave poor housing to Black priests as opposed to what they did for white priests, that the institutional church kept telling Black people to keep praying and to not be violent, right? That so that the institutional church has not been as liberation focused as it would like us to believe. That the church now lifts up Martin Luther King Jr., but remember, his letter from a Birmingham jail was to clergy people. It was to people in that community who should have been his brothers and sisters in the struggle, and yet were so concerned about, you know, be patient, that, you know, change will come, sitting from places of comfort, right? And I think that what we have now in the US is an opportunity for the church, the institutional church, to be on the right side of this struggle. You know, in South Africa, they had the Kairos document, when church leaders said to the church, we have been on the wrong side, and we have been highlighting the wrong things. We have been talking about the violence of the oppressed and not highlighting the violence of the oppressors, for which the oppressed are then responding. So the Kairos document was saying, this is an opportunity that God gives us as the church to be on the right side, to speak truth to power, to speak about the structure of racism. And I believe we are in exactly that same place now in the US, that we are in a time of Kairos, when the church is being given an opportunity to be with the people, to be where Jesus would be, right? Because where Jesus was, when Jesus was alive, was in the street. That's where Jesus was. Jesus was with the people on the margins. Jesus was speaking truth to power constantly. Jesus said, came to bring good news to the poor, to freedom to the prisoners, relief to the oppressed. And that's where the church is supposed to be. And that's where the church started out. And now we have an opportunity now as the church to speak out. And I am so glad to see organizations like Common Hymnal, which is a group of young Christian musicians and leaders who are out there putting out, talking about the importance of protest as part of our faith journey. Because in any situation of oppression, the church is meant to be on the side of the oppressed. And in this country, it has not been the case. You know, when Donald Trump was elected, we had some people putting up that meme of a white Jesus carrying suitcases saying, now it's safe for me to come back to the White House. What? Right? Which, well, you know, first of all, if you've got a white Jesus, you already have a problem, right? But the fact that we have had church leaders saying that this is a man of faith after the ways in which they demonized and vilified Barack Obama, questioned his faith, and even critiqued the minister who had brought him into the church, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, a prophetic voice in the church, not just in the Black church, a prophetic voice for the church, that they attempted to make him out as some evil, hate-filled human being. So we have that side of the church that has for many years dominated the conversation about what it means to be church. And now is the Kairos moment for Christians, for people of faith, to say the church is the church of God that is based on a God who made human beings in God's image and looked at them and said, it is good. This is good. This is good. The way that I have made humanity in its various shades and hairstyles and faith journeys and ways of connecting with me, this is good. And this is who we need to be now.
Amen. Amen.
See, I told y'all, don't get me preaching up in here.
Amen.
It's already started. It's already started. Christy, if you could, Christy, I know we got a lot of questions from the audience.
Yes, we are getting a lot of questions from the audience, and thank you all for your patience. If we're not able to get to your questions, all of the questions today, but we will definitely try. I'd like to do a question from Mr. Alan Yarborough, who works for presiding Bishop Michael Curry in the Episcopal Church's Advocacy Office. He says, I understand our role both as a religious body and as an organization uniquely connected internationally, as you both know. At work, we strive to leverage those unique aspects of our organizational expertise and membership. Yet, perhaps particularly among well-meaning white liberals, we receive negative feedback for including international dimensions to racial justice alongside our responses to U.S. domestic dynamics. What recommendations do you both have for effectively incorporating international components to justice seeking? And perhaps, could you offer a justification for why we should do just that?
Well, I mean, the justification for me is that the church global is the body of Christ. And so that there is not, the borders that human beings have put up are not the way that God looks at the world. And therefore, as the church, and we claim as the church to be the body of Christ, therefore our concern has to be for every part of God's body. And so the international dimensions of particularly the Anglican communion, I think that we have a particular responsibility because we are the Anglican communion. And I know that the question is from the Episcopal Church USA, is that we have a particular responsibility because we are the Anglican communion, because we come out of the Church of England and have been part of Britain's colonization movement around the world. Therefore, we have a particular responsibility to be part of the movement of healing this world from the impact of colonialism, the slave trade, slavery, and structural racism around the world. And it is, to me, it isn't surprising that that there is a pushback on the international focus in the Episcopal Church USA, because the Episcopal Church USA is a predominantly white denomination, right? But the Anglican Communion is not. The Anglican Communion, the average member of the Anglican Communion looks like me, is a Black woman, is an African woman, actually. And so then it changes the dynamic, right? When we're saying we are a predominantly white church, to we are actually truly a multicultural, a multiracial, with a majority Black membership. And so it is that discomfort with having been the center to now being told you are of a larger community. I've just lost my earpod. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you fine.
Too big.
Yeah. We can hear you fine. You just can't hear us.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. I told y'all that technology is not my strong point.
You're doing great.
But the truth is, and that is actually what this whole conversation is about. It is about decentering the white experience in the world, and saying to white people, actually being asked to move from the center is an opportunity for liberation. That we are telling you that if you move from the center and in fact join the circle, it will be better for us all.
I think it's important to also recognize that white people make up 8% of the world population.
And I think that's
interesting.
That's part of the thing, is we're asking, let us decenter that experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yet you know, they are at the center.
Great. Chrissy, do we have another question?
We do. We actually have a specific question for Mungi. Mungi, one of our attendees, Camille, says her favorite chapter in your book is the choosing hope over optimism. Do you think that we are seeing this shift now, as people are moving away from the virtue signaling quick changes and looking towards longer, more rigorous, and possibly more painful changes?
Maybe. I think Black people have probably always chosen hope over optimism, because there hasn't really been an option otherwise. Otherwise, how do you continue? You know, how do you raise your children if you don't have hope for at least their future, even if it's not about yours? You know, it makes me think about the day that the White House occupant was elected. I try not to mention his name in my home. I had a friend who called me just hysterical in tears, and I was as well. And, you know, my mother took the phone because I couldn't speak to her. And what she said was, you know, we've had worse, we've gone through this before, and we will make it through again. And I think that is sort of the hope that people of color and Black Americans hold on to all the time. And now maybe it is strengthened because other people are finally listening. But also in that they're finally listening, it is a bit, I don't know what the word is, mind-boggling that it took this long. You know, I'm still sort of struggling with, how did you not see this 4 years ago? But I think probably, I don't think that we necessarily have more hope, but I think maybe white people do, because I think that's the only way that Black people have survived thus far, is with hope.
Thank you so much, Mungi. Christy, do we have another one? Or
Yes, we have quite a few, just going through them.
Unless Andy had something. Andy, do you want to, or you want to keep
No,
going?
no, go ahead. I want to hear from the audience.
Great.
One of the audience members, Ashley Cox, asks, what are some ways we can show that racism is everyone's problem, referring to the Reverend's comments earlier? Similar to COVID-19, it's challenging to convince someone to care and take action about an issue that isn't impacting them directly.
Yeah. And I mean, and I have such a problem with that, because the truth is it is impacting them directly. And the choice is, are you willing to see that or not? Right? So I think that's the question, is to say to white people, are you willing to see how racism impacts you directly? And because if you are willing, then there is no need for me to go out of my way to say racism impacts you. So, I mean, I could say, one of the things that I said to somebody in Nashville, that I said, racism impacts you because my children are over-policed while your children are under-policed. And in both of those, children die. White children die because they are sent home when they are found drunk or using drugs. The police say, call their parents, take them home, and parents try and deal with drug addiction in whichever way they can. And white children are dying from drug addiction because no one is actually dealing with their addiction. Where our children are being killed blatantly, right, with over-policing. And I said that to a friend after 2 summers, and Mungi had 3 white friends die from drug overdoses of her age group. And I'm like, how does that even happen? But the story is the story of a community that puts it like that we can hide from the reality of white drug use, and we arrest young Black men with marijuana. Or so I mean, I can give you examples like that about how racism impacts us all. But the reality is, if you simply open your eyes, you will see how racism affects you, how racism detracts from your life, how racism, it affects, there's a book that I read called Dying of Whiteness, and I cannot remember the author. It's from Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt, yeah.
And I mean, people voting against health insurance because they didn't want Black people to get Obamacare. So they didn't want to get, so they wouldn't get it. So people actually dying because of their racism, right? People being sick because of their racism. Gun violence in this country, the unwillingness to deal with the proliferation of guns in white hands, leading to untold gun death, right? Voting against educational, I mean, can people look at what has happened to the US education system? Can people look at how badly our young people are being educated in public schools? How, well, I mean, historically, we've all been badly educated here in terms of history, but that so if you cannot see how racism is impacting you every day, I don't know what I can say.
I wanted to ask a question, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask for the way forward, and I want to ask it to Mungi first, to be able to, as a young person, and you are a young person, you're 27 years old.
Oh, I'm actually 28. I think I lied. Wow, sorry.
Oh,
Yes, you did. Didn't you see me do that face like, huh?
No, I wasn't watching you.
Look at my shirt.
Oh, wow, I want one.
We match. What is your thinking of the way forward in this country? Where do you see this country going at this point? And I want to also ask Naomi to answer the same question from a different generation, to be able to speak about how do you see the way forward? Where do you see America, let's say, a year from now, 10 years from now?
So I think I'm a person who errs on the side of over communicating everything in relationships and friendships, and I think that is the way forward, is over communicating, because I think so many of our problems are a lack of discussion and a lack of being willing to acknowledge and keeping things as taboo. And this, you know, I don't say this because I don't speak about politics, but okay, then you not speaking about politics is also political. So I think it again requires conversations on everyone's part, but that is with the caveat that, you know, we as Black people are not being forced to communicate when we don't have the energy or feel the need to, or because we've been saying this for years and it's been written everywhere. So our communication may be you reading what we've written and what we've said before in speeches that have been recorded, and then going and communicating that with the people around you. I think personally, things need to be talked about. I have a friend who said that, you know, the US with racism, it's like this lake that has poison in it and we just keep walking around and around it, but the poison seeps into the ground, even if we won't admit what's happening. And I think that is the US. Everything is a taboo. And so if we don't communicate it, then it may not affect us, but clearly it does affect us. And so, I mean, I think the way forward is conversations. And I think these difficult conversations, I'll be very honest, I think require emotional intelligence that Americans sometimes just don't choose to have. And I'm an American, and I think we really need to work on our emotional intelligence and being able to have difficult conversations.
Now, about 40% of the people support the current president, and or so, between 30 and 40%. Do you see your generation reaching out to that side and saying, let's have this dialogue, let's come together, let's make peace, let's make this work? Or do you see this division that's happening that's going to take a lot longer and many generations before it comes to a conclusion?
Well, it seems like that touches on a few of the answers from my mom, where people don't want to see what is in front of them. But also, education is now this uncool thing, and don't want to be educated because I don't know if it's the fear of what we will learn if we are educated. I think that young people will have to be the ones to reach out. I will be the first to say I do not have the patience of my grandfather. So, you know, if you say something that makes me feel a certain way, I may need some time to like feel that Ubuntu well up in my body again before I can respond to you. But I think the onus probably is on my generation, but sometimes I just need a minute because you said something that was really whack and was harmful. And I want you to know that it's harmful and that you don't own my energy or my time and space. And so I may need to return to this conversation later on when I have something that may penetrate your ears, because it sounds like you don't even want to engage with me. You want to decide how the exchange goes.
Thank you. Naomi, the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a friend put up a question on his Facebook page. Do you think that the U.S. is ready for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And I feel bad because I just said no. and then afterwards I thought about it and I was like, I should have said more about it. But I you know, and recognizing actually that the majority of white South Africans were not ready for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. When the commission started, the death threat to commissioners went sky high. My father had to have 24-hour security. So yeah, recognizing that even then, you know, white South Africans were not ready, and so maybe you start a process even when they're not ready. But I do think that there is more work that needs to be done in the white community around the question that person asked me, how do you show white people that racism is costing them? And I think that this is a place that the churches, that the faith community needs to step up, that we need to see leadership from religious leaders across the range. We need our Muslim leaders, we need our Jewish leaders, we need our Christian leaders, we need our Buddhist leaders. We need everybody. At this point, we need everybody to be at the front of conversations and actions. That we need our faith communities to be calling out those people who sit in their pews. You know, I was amazed how willing the Roman Catholic Church was to say that they were not going to allow politicians who supported abortion to receive communion. I have never seen any church leader say that they are not going to give communion, or they are not going to bless, or they are going to challenge in the sanctuary political leaders who are calling young people animals, who are saying that people should be bombed in this country, who are tear gassing people in churches. This is, I think, for the way forward for us, is for the religious community, the faith community, to step up and say, we are not just going to speak up, we are going to act. We are going to call out our members who are participating in the over-policing, in the brutal policing, in the killing of people, of Black people, of brown-skinned people, that we are going to call out our political, our members who are political leaders who are silent about the oppression occurring in Palestine. We are going to call out our members who are corporations, who are benefiting from prison labor. We are going to call. So this is, as a person whose faith is a fundamental part of who I am, that is the way forward that I see, that I call for, that I believe will be the way that will heal this country.
Thank you so much, Rev.
Charles, you don't have to snap if you don't want to.
No, listen.
We old. I mean,
wanna-
you're younger than I am, but you didn't remember to snap on time.
I know, I gotta get it together.
Gotta snap on time.
I gotta snap on time. Christy has one more question, I think.
The last question.
Yes.
And it was really sort of this, very much building on what you both said right now. And it was a question that we had been thinking about before the event, where we were talking about, and I was getting a better understanding of Ubuntu and what it meant. And it was saying an essential part of Ubuntu is seeing oneself and another, with talk about anti-racism and white alliances and criminal justice reform, including defunding the police, and in terms of religion and the church. How can society, reliant upon the dehumanization of the other, move forward without humanizing each other? Is that even possible? More specifically, how can societies like the United States begin the humanizing process, begin humanizing each other and dismantling this idea of the other, even though the nation was built on this, this is a foundational idea within the nation?
Well, my first is make Mungi's book required reading in K through 12.
It is in all my classes.
That's mom. That's mom. But
she also recorded the audiobook, so
yes.
You can listen to her read that if you'd like.
So Mungi, how do you bring Ubuntu into a system that was based on the antithesis of Ubuntu, has been built on the antithesis of Ubuntu?
I don't know, because my mother often says to me, when something starts ugly, it's gonna be ugly, and I think we're seeing that now. We don't really acknowledge how the country was started and who built this nation. The fact that we're so upset that statues have to be taken down, but we're not upset when Black men are killed, is, I don't know where you tell someone to begin humanizing people, because it seems very easy to humanize statues somehow in our country. So who am I to tell you how to humanize Black people? Because you're not suffering or finding it hard to humanize objects. You just decide that there are other ones that are not. So I think this is probably something that I am struggling with figuring out how to answer, because I do see myself in other people. And I don't know if I put myself in the shoes of people who don't see the other side enough, maybe. In the book I wrote about how my mom said, we all like to think that we would be the one right there in the front lines fighting against injustice. Well, this is the injustice right now. And she also said, you can understand why someone who is benefiting from white supremacy wouldn't feel the need to give up that benefit, because what does it look like if they do? And I see that side, and I don't know if I think about it enough. So long story short, I don't know the answer. But when I do, maybe we will all be humanized, and that'll be that. So give me some time to think about it.
Great.
And for me, I think it goes back to what Mungi said at the beginning, that the only way that you start to undo something that started in ugliness is to excavate the ugliness and to face the ugliness. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that they used to say in South Africa about the TRC was that it was the lancing of a wound, and that you cannot simply cover over a pus-filled wound and hope that everything will go okay, because that pus is just going to spread, and it's just the disease is going to spread throughout. If you want to start, if you want to build a healthy community, you have to start by lancing that pus, allowing the pus to be released, and to speak the truth about how this country was formed. I mean, you know, that people are now saying they had never heard of Juneteenth, that they have never heard of Rosewood, that they had never heard of Tulsa. That's the kind of indictment of the ahistorical way that we have educated our young people in this country, and our young people who are now old people. That's how that people talk about the amazingness of the GI Bill without ever paying attention to the fact that the majority of Black GIs were completely left out of that bill. So that until we educate ourselves about the true history of this country, and not simply the history that makes people proud, then humanizing one another cannot fully take place.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, it's part of what we do with the Mitchell program is really center around the importance of narrative change, right? And that's really what we believe is the first step, right? Narrative change. And then we can talk about social transformation. And I'm just so thankful to have you both on tonight. It's extremely been
Thank
an
you
honor.
for having us.
Listen, you all
Thank you.
you already have thousands of fans, but now in our community at A.C.T.O.R, I think we've built an addition to your fan club. So yeah,
Thank you all. Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you.
You filled my heart and my head. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and so I'm going to pass it over to Christy, unless you all had some final words. But Christy, go ahead.
Actually, Anjanae is going to wrap it up. And I don't think we had any additional questions. So Anjanae, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Mungi and Reverend Naomi. We appreciate your wisdom, your insights, your hilarity, and just bringing this conversation from a Black woman perspective is hugely important to the conversation that we're having around race in America and around the globe.